Good afternoon. Have you ever experienced customer rage? Unfortunately, I bet we all probably have. Welcome to our complimentary webinar on why the customer care revolution is failing. Today's presentation is sponsored by TMP Direct, delivering unique sales and customer care solutions for over 25 years. I'm your host, Dan Collins, president of TMP Direct. The Customer Care Measurement and Consulting Group, CCMC, in cooperation with Arizona State University's Center for Services Leadership, has recently completed the most current national customer rage survey. The customer rage survey has been completed several times since 2003 and most recently in 2011. The study is widely recognized as a preeminent barometer of customer satisfaction in America. The story told by the customer rage survey is more than mere hyperbole about the out-of-the-ordinary angry customer. In fact, the study offers insight for engineering an extraordinary customer care experience and what is expected. Today's webinar explores the underlying psychology of customer care expectations, as well as the bottom line benefits and consequences of exceeding or failing to meet those expectations. I would like to welcome our featured speaker, Scott Brotzman, President and CEO of Customer Care Measurement and Consulting. Scott is the author of the Customer Rage Study, done in cooperation with Arizona State University. Scott has been helping customer care professionals build the business case around customer loyalty for over 20 years. As a result of today's presentation, you will go home with a different perspective on what is needed to minimize customer rage. Additionally, we will send you a copy of the National Customer Rage Study and an accompanying white paper of some additional results and insight. You'll also receive a brief survey asking for your feedback on today's presentation in preparation for the next webinar in our series. Just a couple housekeeping items. The presentation is going to take about 45 minutes. We will reserve the last 15 minutes of the hour for you to ask questions. You'll see on the screen where you can submit questions, and at any time during the presentation you want to ask a question, please feel free to submit it. Hopefully we will get to all of your questions. If not, we will include them in our follow-up to the presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn over the presentation to Scott Brotzman.
Great, thanks, thanks Dan, and thank you all for being here. I think we have an exciting trip through customer rage land planned for you. This is one of my favorite studies that we do. We do lots of them, both on a national basis and on a proprietary basis, but this may be my favorite. It's the only study of its kind, in as much as there's plenty of studies about the quality of products and services, like the J.D. Powers kinds of studies. There's the American Customer Satisfaction Index and a host of other kinds of studies, but none of those studies really deal with what is arguably one of the most important components of the customer experience, and that has to do with customer care in general and complaint handling specifically, because as we all know, things go wrong more often times than they go right with products and services for lots of different reasons. And we know, as we'll see both in these data and some historical data, that customer care and complaint handling have a profound impact on the bottom line profitability of every company today. So this unusual picture, who some have said looks like Ray Bolger from the Wizard of Oz, is actually, his name is Ted Lewis, also known as Mr. Entertainment, and he was a relatively obscure jazz musician sometime around the 20s who probably was infamous for, he used to have a phrase where he'd say, "Is everybody happy?" And I thought of him in the context of today's presentation on customer rage, because if he were alive today and he were talking about customer care, I don't think he'd say, "Is everybody happy?" He would ask, "Is anybody happy?" because more often than not, if you look around, no matter where you look today, you would find that nobody seems to be particularly gratified or happy or content with customer care, whether you're talking about the customers that we serve or whether you're talking about those who do serve. And it was part of the reason that we launched back in 2003 the very first National Customer Rage Survey. As a brief digression, the reason that we did the study is there was an article in the Washington Post, which is where our offices are in the Metro DC area, that said lots of companies were having trouble holding on to their customer service employees because customers were so rude and the job was low paying and very stressful. So we did some looking around to find some quantitative or empirical data to back that up, and there wasn't any. So it got us to thinking, maybe there's something here that we need to look at, and lo and behold, what you see today is the output from that initial interest, the National Customer Rage Study. What it does is it really tries to do three things. It takes the pulse of the American customer care experience, and we have another one that we do in the UK that does the British customer care experience. It secondly defines trends in complaint handling satisfaction and their impact on brand loyalty, which, as we'll see in a minute, again, are rather profound. And then third, we try to look at some of the emerging trends in customer care expectations. As an example, in 2011, we looked at social media in its relationship to customer care, something we're not going to talk about in detail today. That's really the subject of a whole different webinar. But nonetheless, when you get the full RAGE report, there will be some data in there relative to some of those findings. So let me talk a little bit more about the methodology before we get into some of the detailed findings. But the study, just so that we can be transparent about its sponsorship, sponsored by my company, Customer Care Measurement Consulting, another company called Surpass Contact Centers, who does all of the interviews, the 1,000+ interviews that we did for the 2011 study. And we've done this study in collaboration with the Center for Services Leadership, which is in the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. So it is an independently self-funded kind of study. So a bit about methodology. It's the 5th time we've done this particular study, 3 times between 2003 and 7, and that's how you'll reference some of the data that we'll look at later today when we compare it to the most current wave, which was 2011. And it's really, this study is an extension of a study that my colleague did, one of the other authors of the RAGE study, Mark Rayner, who worked for a company called TARP. And TARP did a study back in the middle 70s for the U.S. Office of Consumer Affairs through the White House, Nixon administration, that really was the very first study to look at the bottom line impact of complaint handling. And so the RAGE study really is an extension of that with some additional focus of the type that I've described about angry customers and the kinds of things that they're looking for. It's a telephone interview methodology, 1,000 completed interviews, and this year, as opposed to some of the prior years, it actually includes almost 250 respondents who identified that their cell phone is their primary phone, which is an important characteristic of good methodology these days, because there are some states where 25% of people in the state don't have a landline, and you'd be missing out on a rather significant systematic set of opinions about those people. It's an average of about a 15-minute interview, about 80 or 90 questions, all centered around, did you have a problem in the last 12 months? And if you said you had a problem in the last 12 months, which in this case 45% of Americans did, that's another substantive finding in and of itself, then you got a lot of other questions about your customer care experience and customer rage and the rest. So it's important to remember that we're talking about a household's most serious problem in the last 12 months. And I don't know about you, but in my house, we have more than one product and service problem in the last 12 months. So at some level, you could argue that the findings we'll look at today are really probably a very conservative estimate of the kinds of things going on in the marketplace relative to customer care and and customer rage. So I also mentioned, just to close out the description of methodology, lots of questions about social media and social networking, none of which we're really going to cover today, but will be provided to you in the full report. So that you have a good feeling about who are the people we interviewed, who in the heck would complete a 15-minute interview. Gosh, they must be people that are only left-handed and blind in one eye. No, as a matter of fact, it's very projectable. You can see here, very representative against the U.S. population in all the important characteristics, gender, age, income, and as I mentioned earlier, cell phone usage. So we feel pretty good about the generalizability, credibility of the information that you're going to see shortly. So let's begin our conversation talking about customer care as the double-edged sword. And what I mean by that is that done the right way, customer care can have a really positive, fascinating, remarkable, profound impact on the company. Word of mouth, profitability, all the usual suspects. But if you do it wrong, if you fail to do the right things, if you do the right things in the wrong way, it can be an expensive way to lose brand loyalty. In fact, one of my colleagues calls customer care for those companies that don't do it the right way the multi-million-dollar sinkhole, because it costs a lot of money to run contact centers and to provide customer care. Probably much more money than it ever did 30 years ago, 35 years ago, which is a good place to sort of look backward to appreciate some of this double-edged sword that customer care is. So you're looking at a bunch of pictures that reflect when I grew up as a kid, so that gives you an idea of how old I am. This is back in the 70s. Some of these look real familiar. Some of these may not. But it was a time of change, a time of upheaval, a time of discord, and wrapped around that was a little-known study by an incubator firm called TARP, also headquartered in the D.C. area, a firm that I worked for the better part of almost 15 years. And that study, the White House study, was the first one that ever created a linkage between better customer care and a bottom-line result. And here you see the results from that very first study, that if you handled complaints satisfactorily, you had more brand loyalty, more people would buy from you than if you didn't do a good job of handling them. Complaints, unsatisfactory result. And by the way, even if you didn't handle them well, you got brand loyalty benefits, because look at the difference between those who didn't complain and those who complained and didn't get a satisfactory result. So this was the study that put customer care on the map. It converted customer care from a cost center to a profit center, from a back office function to a front line kind of function, from an inconvenience to an imperative. It was the piece that really moved customer care from solely an operational kind of thing to potentially a marketing activity. And along the way, companies listen very intently to the results of that study, because over the last 30 years, here you see listed a whole bunch of initiatives which understate the amount of effort and the amount of money that corporate America has spent to invest in the customer care experience and to engineer it to make a difference in the business outcomes. They've invested literally billions, 800 numbers, surveys, CRM systems, and today self-service, all the kinds of social media. And for me, when I look at that and I look at this next slide, it's just remarkable. This is the one slide that I think tells the entire story. In 1976, if you look at the far right bar, 23% of Americans were satisfied with the action taken by companies to resolve their most serious problem. 23%. That's not the remarkable part. The remarkable part is 35 years later, in 2011, we have fewer Americans satisfied with the action taken to resolve their complaints than they were in 1976. 21%. How is it possible, how is it probable, how is it real that we have fewer people satisfied today with our complaint handling after spending as much effort and as much money as has been spent to create and engineer a great customer care experience. And, you know, same methodology, same question, same country. The only thing that's changed is 35 years and billions of dollars. And when you look at the impact of that experience today on brand loyalty, it shouldn't be surprising that it reflects the double-edged sword that we've described just a few minutes ago. Here you're looking at what is the impact of complainant satisfaction on their overall satisfaction with the company, their likelihood to recommend the company, and the number of people that they told about the experience that they had. And as you can see in the highlighted boxes, satisfied complainants are 2 to 3 to 4 times more likely to recommend you than are those who are less than satisfied. And those who are less than satisfied are telling an average of 23 to 25 other people about their bad experience. So, you know, one thing hasn't changed, and that is the stickiness and the impact of a customer care experience on the customer's intention to do business with you and the kind of things they'll share with other people in the marketplace. From a sort of a nationwide perspective, extrapolating to the nation, conservatively we estimate that today the way in which companies respond to complaints combined with some of the rage activities we'll talk about puts over $58 billion, that's billion with a B, $58 billion at risk. And that's a very simple and conservative estimate here that you see, where all we're looking at is the number of households in America that had problems. That's the number at the top. The number that have had rage, and then looking at the amount of postings that go on, and just simply using the average cost for the product or service involved, we get to the $58 billion. So just significant and unbelievable impact on the marketplace and on individual companies and the customers that they do business with. So I would say before we begin our next odyssey here into the why, we haven't made much progress. That would be the sort of first conclusion from the customer rage study, despite good intentions and despite significant investments. And I think there are 2 primary reasons why, and I'd like to talk about those in the balance of our conversation using results of the rage study and some other studies that I hope will provide you as a practitioner with practical insights into how you might do some things differently in each of your own companies to leverage and re-engineer the customer experience. And the first of those 2 things, those 2 broad areas, relates to what I've described here as the power of language. The power of language, what influence it has on the customer care experience, and how can we rethink our use of language in our various customer care applications that we all work on every day. And I start with this quote from Mark Twain, because I think it reflects the fact that, to me, in customer care, language is a differentiator. It reflects who you are, but at the same time, the language that you use shapes who you are. And one need only look at the language of customer care to have an appreciation, maybe, for why the return on investment that I've said we're not getting is ripe, low-hanging fruit for improving. And we start by looking back again before we look forward. The language of customer care for a generation, several generations actually, was this, right? The customer is always right. It comes out of, if you're wondering who originally coined that, on the top you see a man named and his wife named Selfridge, and on the bottom it's Marshall Field. And one of these 2 folks is usually attributed the quote, "For the customer is always right." And this language shaped for so long how companies did business with their customers and what customers came to expect in their relationship with companies. Well, In 2005, we did a study, another study called the Art of an Apology study, something I'll talk a little bit more about in this conversation today. And one of the questions we asked was, thinking about your experiences in the last 12 months, how do you think you've been treated? Do customers, how do these companies treat their customers today? And is the customer always right? Only 4% said that they feel as if they're treated as though they're always right. And if you're a glass half full kind of person, maybe you say that it's 25% because you take the 21% that are in the often category. But what this finding suggests is that the language of our forefathers and mothers from generations ago about the customer always being right, that's not the language that operates in today's marketplace. In fact, you could argue that many customers come into the customer care experience carrying a chip on their shoulder. And you can see it in the kind of language that's evolving that people are speaking, whether you're on the customer side or on the service provider side. You can see it in the language of advocacy. You know, these are just a couple of icons of numerous kinds of advocacy groups that are creeping up everywhere to speak on behalf of consumers a very different language. You can see it in the language that service providers use. So I don't know if you've ever seen this site. I've been going to it for many years to sort of landscape what's going on in the customer care world. It's called customersuck.com. And their tagline, just because we serve them doesn't mean we like them, is a good insight into what goes on at this particular site. One of the other things you'd read in here is, some customers suck, and this is where we talk about them. So this is a site used by customer care professionals, in the loosest manner of speaking, to ventilate their experience working with customers. It's part of the language evolving in customer care. Or on the business side, at the sort of enterprise level, you would find tons of articles like this. When, why, and how do we fire our customer? Is it ever okay to fire your customer? What are the sayonara steps? How do you tell a customer goodbye? So when you reflect on the language of the generations ago and look at the language and what's shaping our use of language and dialogue and relationship with our customers today, they're really at very different places. And part of this is captured in the findings of the RAGE study. We asked one question. This is it that defines RAGE. We asked people how upset they were about their most serious household problem that they experienced in the last 12 months. And when we first did the study, I had people that would criticize it, saying it was really unfair to say that all these people have RAGE, and you're encouraging them to say that they have RAGE, and the answer to that, of course, is poppycock, because this is a scale that they could say they're not upset at all. But, in fact, among those who had a problem in the last 12 months in 2011, 60% of them, almost two-thirds, said that they experienced customer RAGE. That is, they were extremely or very upset. And while that's declined from the overall, the 2003 to 2011 period, where it's 68%, it's still a lot of people. 60% of consumers experience RAGE. And I think the takeaway from this in your companies is that, redefining the customer experience as customers bring a lot of emotion to that experience on a routine basis is probably where you can generalize this above and beyond the hyperbole and the really crazy kinds of customer RAGE things that we all know and have heard about, like these. This is also part of the lexicon and the dialect of customer care. You know who this is? This is Steven Slater, right? The guy from JetBlue that slid down the slide after uttering the profanities at the beginning that you see listed here. That's part of our customer care experience. That's a manifestation of RAGE. You don't need me to tell you that reflects rage. Or this famous story, bitch dog. I don't know if you've heard this story. Emily Yellen, New York Times journalist, did a book that included a lot of the rage data, came out roughly 2 years ago. It's called Your Call Is Not That Important to Us. This is a story that was first reported by a friend of ours, Don Oldenburg of the Washington Post, about a Comcast consumer that had a problem with her cable service. And her name is Lachania Govan. It's a real person. Oddly enough, ironically, she works in customer care. She had called Comcast 47 times. She kept a diary because it was becoming such an obsession. She's a working mother, 2 kids, and she said, this became a second job for her. She would call Comcast when she was at work. She would call them when she was doing laundry. She would call them when she was running errands. 47 times. Well, she finally got a hold of somebody that helped her, and she thought the problem was over until she opened her bill from Comcast the next month, and it was addressed to bitch dog. So someone, obviously within the company, had gone in and altered her name within the customer information file to name her this as a result of their experience with her on the phone. The capstone on the story is that Comcast, after the story went public, of course, an executive called her and offered her 2 months of free cable. Then, when she didn't respond, they called back and offered her 6 months of free cable. And when we talk in a moment about what people want and what they get when they have a customer care problem, her words that she said in response to why she didn't take either of those offers, I think are so meaningful. She said, Comcast is just going to have to accept the fact that they humiliated me. So the things that people want in their customer care experiences sometimes aren't all about money, something that we'll look at shortly. But I guess what we're building up to here as we've gone through where generations past people were and where they are today, the change in language, it shapes who we are, it reflects who we are, and to some degree, I would argue that when you think about language, it's not something that's second nature. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a while, but I don't know if you remember this particular game show back in the 60s. It's called Concentration. And Concentration featured these things that are called rebus puzzles. This is Hugh Downs, by the way, who was the person that did it. Here's the simple rebus puzzle. Everybody can figure that one out, right? Afterthought and afterthought, right? That's an easy one. How about this one? The one problem with webinars, you can never tell what the reaction is. I hope you're laughing as I am, but it was no laughing matter to the CEO of a publicly held company who used this word to describe his relationship with a client we were doing interviews for, client satisfaction interviews, when I asked how things went the last year. And he said, goat screw. And he went on to describe how his company got into a close to $10 million deal with this other particular company and presented it to their board, and the day before they were to finalize it with their board of directors, they got a call from our client who said, we can't do the deal, and we're sorry, but we missed a signature. And so I raised this as, the customer rage concept, though it seems to be very limited maybe to business to consumer, is really, really embedded in all our customer care experiences. Even if you're on the business to business side, the kind of emotion, the language, the behaviors, the things people want, they remain rather the same. Doesn't matter if what you're selling, who you're selling to, it's part of the DNA of the customer care experience. And when you take this down one further level, talking about language and its role in that, we know from our proprietary research the number one thing that people want, the number one thing is getting what they want, getting what they ask for. This is based on, dozens of years of statistical kinds of analysis from all our proprietary work. The lesser things that matter are process things. What are process things? Could I get a hold of you? How easy was it to get a hold of you? How long was I on hold? Was it first contact resolution? Were the people courteous? Those are all process-related things. 60% of your satisfaction with the action taken relates not to those, but to did you get what you want? And in the RAGE study, we ask two questions related to that. First, we ask people, here's a list of 11 different things, which I'll show you in a second. And I'd like to know, did you want any of these? What did you want to get to resolve your most serious problem? Later in the questionnaire, we then say, now I'm going to give you this list, and I want you to tell me, did you get any of these things? Half of those we asked said that they got nothing, or bubkis, which is a Yiddish term for less than nothing. Half of complainants say that they got nothing. And what they're really looking for is something that we call psychological currency. What do I mean by psychological currency? Here are the 11 things that we asked, did you want these and did you get them? And if you look at these 11 things, 6 of the top 7 have nothing to do with money. Dignity, explanation of why the problem occurred, assurance, express my anger, thank you for my business, or an apology. 6 of the top 7 are related not to money, but they're related to relationship. They're related to dignity. They're related to communication. They're related to ego. They're emotional, not financial. Equity here is in the emotion, not in the money. Now, there are people that do want money. We're not saying that. That would be unrealistic. But when you look at that, I think that's the first piece that relates to language that we're gonna continue to pursue here. The second piece is look at the incongruency between what they wanted and what they got. 90% wanted to be treated with dignity. Only 40% felt that they got dignity, that they were treated with dignity, sorry. And so forth and so on as you look down the list. And what's remarkable about these non-monetary remedies, this psychological currency, it's the closest thing that you have to pixie dust or fairy dust. You sprinkle it on the consumer, and look what happens. Among those respondents to the RAGE study who said they got nothing, I'm over here on the far left, my left of the chart, among those who said, I got nothing, remember there were about half of people that said that, only 7% of them were satisfied with the action taken. Among those who got nothing, 28% were mollified. Those are good consumers to have, by the way, huh? But the lion's share of them, 2/3, were dissatisfied. So getting nothing is pretty much a prescription that you're not going to have satisfied consumers. But look what happens if they get an apology, an explanation, or any of these other non-monetary remedies on the top. Satisfaction grows exponentially. It's not 65% dissatisfied anymore, it's only 10%, because by virtue of getting an apology or an explanation or any of these other non-monetary remedies, you have a profound impact on the customer care satisfaction without spending a dime. Now, you spend money to train, to call monitor, to survey, but part of the question you should be asking yourself here is, am I measuring and attending to the right things? Does my monitoring take into account some of these kinds of aspects of the customer care experience and the language used to do them? And language is key, because even when we speak the same language, it's difficult to communicate. I lived in the UK for 3 years when I ran TARP Europe, and I had to learn a whole new language, because in the US, when I say chips, we're talking about what? Potato chips. But if I say chips in England, somebody's going to bring me a basket of French fries with ketchup or with, I guess, malt vinegar. If I'm in the UK and I go into a a dentist and ask for braces, he's going to call the police, because braces don't mean things I put on my teeth in the UK. They're suspenders that I wear. He's going to tell me to go to Harrods and pick out a pair of suspenders. If I'm in the UK and I say I'm looking for a hooker, they're going to send me to the rugby match, not down to the local blue light district, and so on and so forth. So I guess my point is the language we use, even when we speak the same language, is something, particularly in customer care, that requires a lot of practice. The Art of an Apology study that we did back in 2005 is a good illustration. We called 100 companies and 25 in 4 different sectors: automotive, consumer electronics, financial, and travel and leisure. And we called them twice. First we called and said, tell me about the location of your nearest store, outlet, what have you. And then we called back a day later and said, well, I went there, but there was no store. You gave me the wrong address. And we invited them, scripted, up to 5 different times, to apologize for that mistake. And you can see the words listed here. I'm calling to complain. I called this number and I was given the wrong address. We waited 3 seconds, and if they didn't apologize, we said the correct address was, but I was given blank. We waited 3 seconds. If they didn't apologize, I just want you to know how I feel. I thought you might want to know. I didn't feel you wanted my business. I expect more. If they still didn't apologize, waited again, and so forth, for these 5 different invitations to apologize. And it's fascinating when you look at what we got. About 1/3 of the companies apologized after the first invitation. 1/3 of them got it right up front. But the way that I look at these is 50% of the companies took more than 3 invitations to apologize to get it. And why is that? Well, to my mind, it's because apologizing and some of the other non-monetary remedies aren't second nature. They're an acquired skill. They are a learned language that people have to practice. And putting aside the stuff that legal, sometimes will intervene and say you can't apologize. This was simple. Anybody should be able to apologize about that. So what did they say instead? This was for those after, I think, the first one. Zip code, where you located. Did you get it through somebody else? I don't know who to transfer you to. You want to file a complaint? Oh, wow. Did you get the rep's name? A lot of things that have nothing to do with even recognizing the authority of the consumer and recognizing and respecting the dignity of the consumer. After the third one, this is the one where we said, I just want you to know how you feel. Maybe the second one. And I expected more from your company. More of the same. Goodness gracious. It was a simple mistake, ma'am, getting defensive. So I think the apology study more than adequately represents the fact that this language of psychological currency is not second nature to the work that we do every day, despite our training, despite our monitoring, despite our surveying. This requires a whole different level of investment and training and rethinking of the customer care experience. So language was the first. The second piece, as we wrap up, is this notion that rage and some of the things that go with it, I think to some degree, are the result of conventional wisdom gone wrong. And by that I mean a lot of times we don't know a lot about what consumers want. We think we do because we talk with them every day, but we really don't. And I want to do a short poll. Here's the question. You have the ability to weigh in on the poll. All else being equal, which policy will generate the highest satisfaction during a telephone customer care interaction? Is it using the customer's first name or last name? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to respond. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. And the results were, Amy, can you read the results? I can't see them here.
Yeah,
there they
sure,
are.
Scott. Using the customer's first name, overwhelmingly 63%.
Right, but 40-some% said using the last name, right?
Mm-hmm, correct.
Right. Let's do the second poll before I make the point here. And on that one, I want you to, hold on. All else being equal, when you get real busy, which of the following 3 policies would be the best one from a customer satisfaction perspective? Should you busy out the trunk lines? Should you use a recorded message to ask callers to call back? Or should you use a recorded message asking them to leave a message due to high call volume? Which one of the 3 is best from a customer sat perspective? Give you 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. And let's look at the results to that. And the results to that were, Amy, you'll have to read them again. My eyesight's failing me.
Sure. 80% suggested use a recorded message asking the callers to leave a message.
Right. So, what I find interesting in this is all of us on the line, everybody on the line, is a customer care professional practitioner. Yet, we don't have complete agreement about what it is that will generate customer satisfaction in our policies. And that led us to a companion study that we did in addition to the RAGE study called the Conventional Wisdom Study. We presented Americans with 85 different, not all of them because there was a bunch of different samples, but 85 different practices related to customer care by telephone, 62 by email, and had them rate them 0 to 10. 0 means it would decrease your satisfaction, 10 means it would increase. And then we rated those, calibrated them as having a strong positive to negative impact based on whatever the average score was for each of those different policies. And you just participated in a couple of the examples that we used. You said, 60% of you said, I think, first name, 40% said last name. Well, in fact, neither of them really, first name wins just by a hair, but neither of them really have a very big impact on satisfaction. They're sort of in the, I think the first name is in the positive, the last name is in the neutral, but no real big impact. And that's for telephone. For email, it doesn't make a difference. And so, I raise this point because a lot of customer contact centers will invest significant resources fighting over, simple policies like that when in fact they don't know whether these things have an impact and they don't know how much impact. The study that we're looking at, to some degree, begins to give you some insights. With respect to the other one, I think 60% of you, or 80% of you said that the most important one was the recorded message. Well, here you get the results, and you can see that none of these have a very positive impact at all. What's the number one thing you could do if you have this problem on a regular basis? Put a recording at the front end that tells them how long they have to wait. That has a much more positive impact. You can see a strong positive impact on the customer care experience. And I'll close with, when I talk about conventional wisdom, this example based on our proprietary data. It's always been said to us that the easy way to get customer satisfaction is to buy it. You give people money and you're good to go. You're going to get great CSI kinds of scores. So we had a particular client that wanted to put this to the test, and what they did is they gave everybody who called and complained the same amount of money. I won't tell you how much it is or what it is, but it's money, real money. Then they also did a survey to see, did they get what they wanted in terms of psychological currency? Did they get an apology, a thanks for their business, or a reassurance? So that comes from the survey that they did of their customers. What did we find out? Well, among those who got money and no psychological currency, 38% were satisfied with the action taken. Among those who got money and one of the three, only 39%. So just giving sort of a courtesy piece of psychological currency doesn't really do much. But look at what happened when they got money plus genuine and multiple pieces of that psychological currency. That's a good spend of your goodwill budget. But simply to hand out money, coupons, goodwill, and not couple it with the kinds of things that customers most want when they come to you with their problems is like flushing money right down the toilet. What we've tried to do today in a very short time is piece together a story for you about the power of customer care. We talked about it's an imperative for creating enduring relationships that are profitable. I tried to make the case that the old school language and mentality are gone. They're out of vogue. That what we really need to do is do a better job of using language as a means of concentrating on what they want, which is this notion of psychological currency, followed up by a point that delivering that is an acquired skill. It doesn't come naturally to us. It's very foreign. And finally, that when we talk about measuring and understanding what consumers want and whether we're delivering against it, you can't do it by intuition because your conventional wisdom frequently will not be aligned with what customers really, really want. Thank you, and I think we have some time for questions.
Scott, that was great. I really appreciate it. Very, very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. One of the big takeaways, I think, for me and everyone would be the psychological currency is a very important part of the process, and that's what we all should keep in mind when we engage our customers and try to help them and resolve their issues. We do have a couple questions. I have a couple of simple ones here. One was asked, how many times has the customer rage study been completed since 2003?
So it's been done 5 times. There's a big gap between 2007 and 2011, and the primary reason is it costs a lot of money to do the study. 1,000 telephone interviews nationwide is not cheap.
I could understand, but the results are important, and maybe that's the next question leads into when looking at the scenario for companies with an opportunity to apologize or provide psychological currency. Why do you think so many companies had difficulty getting to that I'm sorry point?
Well, I think one reason is most of their training time is invested in learning how to use the computer and things that are important to doing their job. They're enablers, but they're not satisfiers. And I think predominantly companies invest too little time, and when they do invest some time, they do it in the wrong way, trying to give people practice how to use these. We did just as a digression, we did a quick training one time with a particular client and asked people to, it's called the cans to the can, or the cannots to the cans. We asked like a room full of customer care frontline people to take these like 3 statements that were phrased as cannots for their industry, very specific stuff they would deal with every day, and to turn them into cans, what they can do instead of what they can't do. Half the reps couldn't do it. The half that could do it, the things that they said, for another quarter of them were just ridiculous. So I think how we train people in doing this makes a big impact or not.
You made the point up front about how much time, money, billions of dollars, technology has been invested since the original customer care concept came out of that 1976 study. Why are companies overall, why are we not progressing? Why are we regressing?
Well, pretty big question. I'll try and break it down into bite-sized pieces. I think part of the reason is they're putting up lots of barriers. Self-service oftentimes has become a barrier. As an example, it's not that you shouldn't have self-service or a focus on social media, but as you'll see in some of the other findings we didn't cover today, that's one small element of the customer care experience, and I think companies frequently are not focusing on the things that matter most, which is conversations. That's how most customer care transactions still take place. Not the repetitive ones where people are getting their account balance and that kind of stuff, but when it's not that, it happens by conversation. And there are many barriers to conversation.
You focused on consumers that had a direct contact with the provider, the manufacturer, the service provider. Are there any plans for the RAGE study to expand into other communication channels such as chat, email, social media?
Can you still hear me, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, great, because I got a note saying program difficulties. But the RAGE study actually deals with people that have contacted by phone, by email, in person. It's just that most of them contact by phone. So the RAGE study doesn't, in fact, reflect customer care experiences by other channels.
Follow-up question to that is, social media has given consumers an outlet to express their rage, and what many companies, and you alluded to it, have started reacting to the customer in maybe a negative way. Should companies be focusing on that one or that small minority of people who are screaming very, very, very loud and a lot of people listen to, or should they be focusing more on the general population of complainants as opposed to the small people that are the most vocal?
Well, obviously, your policies and your training and your effort to improve should cut across the customer base, but you have to recognize that the people that scream and yell are tip of the iceberg in many cases. That's partly what this RAGE study, I think, uncovers, is that there's a lot more people out there with emotion than you would otherwise know. In fact, one of the slides we didn't show, I think it's roughly 25% of those with rage say that they raised their voice or cursed. The number one thing that people do is they tell their friends. So there are a lot of people out there with silent rage.
Maybe you can go into a little bit more detail on what is going to be covered in the materials that are going to be sent out as a follow-up to this.
Right. So you'll receive two things. You'll receive a PowerPoint deck that has the detailed findings of the RAGE study, including all the social media, social networking related findings. And you'll secondly receive a white paper that is the summary of the conventional wisdom study, which in effect presents to you all 85 customer care telephone practices and all 62 email customer care practices, rank ordered for their impact on customer satisfaction using that 0 to 10 average score. So you'll have a pretty good toolkit for thinking about how to apply this work in your everyday life. Excellent.
Scott and our audience, we are coming to the end of our hour, so I would like to thank everyone in our audience for participating today. Scott, I want to thank you for preparing a very, very thorough and insightful presentation as a result of all the work that you put into the customer rage study. and that you've been doing over since 2003. As Scott just said, you will be receiving shortly the white paper and a copy of the RAGE study, and also a brief survey. We'd love to get your feedback on today's webinar, and it'll help us prepare for our next presentation in the series. If any of you do have any questions beyond today, in the follow-up emails will be our contact information, so please don't hesitate to contact myself or Scott. Thank you very much for attending, and hopefully you've taken something away from our presentation today. Everyone have a great day.